Hi there, welcome to Where We're At. I'm Rebecca Rankin.
I'm Lana Ogilvie. Hey, Rebecca, so where are you at?
So I want to talk to you a little bit about something that I think a lot of people find a little bit depressing and maybe put off, but let's call it end-of-life planning. And it goes beyond estates and wills. There's lots of stuff you have to get into.
Exactly. Like both of us, our parents are getting older. Like as you age, your parents are getting older and there are those things you have to deal with. So one of the questions, with this topic is you need to ask yourself, if I had died yesterday, what would you want to be in place?
That's a really good way to put it, right? Like just think about it, it's not miserable, right? So you can leave your family scrambling, obviously, to make all these arrangements, or they could be calmly executing your wishes.
So the idea with this episode is to kind of break the stigma about, doing all of this stuff, because after all, although we don't want to admit it or think about it often, death is something that's going to happen to all of us. Like that's the only guarantee in life, death and taxes, right?
Okay, so in that vein, we have a guest today. Her name is Meredith Cox. She is a family law attorney who says, don't leave them guessing as you take the exit stage left. Take control of your future now. You are going to absolutely love the peace of mind that comes from your very own carefully designed as well as executed end-of-life plan.
Remember, it's always too early to plan until it's too late.
Hi. Hey, Meredith. Thank you for coming on and discussing this topic with us. It's one of those ones that I think people get a little bit queasy about or they avoid for whatever reason.
I mean, one of the things I liked when we spoke to you the other day, you were talking about how to make it easier for people to kind of, start on this journey, right?
So whether or not you choose to get your legal stuff into some kind of structure, your financial stuff into structure, start decluttering, just do something. And then by the end of the year, you've got a whole lot done. You're not going to get it done in a day. And if you look at the mountain that you have to climb, you're going to be overwhelmed. You're going to be scared. And you're going to procrastinate and go and watch Netflix. More practically speaking, I would say, get your bank accounts out, take a look at them, take inventory of what you've got. And then also make sure you're talking to somebody about what your plan is, because a lot of people have this plan in their head and they have all these reservations. Well, I don't want this, I don't want that, but they haven't told anybody. And so recently I had a conversation with somebody about that. And I said, have you told anybody that this is your plan? And she said, well, no, you're the first person. And I said, but if you tell me, no one's going to believe me. This is a wacky plan. And so I said, you better tell somebody else. It can't just be me or I'll be all alone screaming in the wilderness.
So can you we've spoken about this a little bit and I've done a little bit of research coming into this, but I need you as the expert to kind of break this down. So what are the basics?
So top, I would say legals and financials. I think that's really, really important. So that means you got to get your will in place, powers of attorney, and you think about it in sort of two separate quadrants. What if I weren't able to speak for myself, but I'm still alive? And what if I'm dead and I can't speak for myself? So that's why you get those legal documents into place. And I think that's a great starting point. The amount of relief that you get from having a will and a couple of powers of attorney in place, one for health and one for property. So healthcare decisions, property decisions. Once you have that, you almost feel like, wow, I'm 75% done. Although you're really not, because the real work is probably on the decluttering. But there's the legal part, and then there's taking inventory of all your financial stuff, where your bank accounts are, writing out a list, all your life insurance policies. Because if something happens to you, you don't want your family to have to guess and go to a psychic and say, what were the numbers on that life insurance policy? Because I don't think the psychic will be able to say, yeah, it's actually Transamerica. They're not going to know, right?
Ooh, I can see your number. Is this the right number? Tell me your number. Now everything's gone. Oh, look, she made it disappear.
I love that we're talking about end-of-life planning and we are giggling, here on this lovely morning. I mean, this is great. So we've got legal. So that's the will, estate planning if you have some property. Where do we but like some of us have younger children, people under 18. Some of us are looking after older parents. They might be in our care. And some of us have, adult dependent children. Where do we throw those in and is there a plan necessary for that?
They're hard to plan for, but guardianship of children for their property. So the children, you might have assets that are going to be used to support your children if you're not here. So a lawyer can help with that as well. But you need to be speaking to someone too about who might be the guardian, who's the trusted person. So a lot of this is about looking for the person that you trust to make those decisions for you when you can't. And sometimes it looks like a short list. So you have to kind of take that risk, go out on a limb and ask somebody. And I think that's where you really feel exposed. It's like, here are my passwords. Here, these are my bank accounts. This is how much money I have. So if you have a spouse, that might work. If you have a sibling, that might work, or a really, really good friend. Most people have somebody that they can tell. And I think it's just that getting over that hump of saying, this is what I've got. This is what you might need to know about.
Give me an idea just on those two topics, the legals and the financials. In your practice, or even stories you've heard in the groups that you've been part of, or when you've done training, give us one kind of extreme story. I'm looking for this person passed away and nobody knew that they actually owned a whole estate in, the north of Scotland. What are some of the things that, you've heard?
It's usually people who forget to tell anybody that they own a condominium or that they inherited a piece of property that maybe hadn't been dealt with thoroughly through the deceased relative's estate. So they didn't really fully feel they had ownership of it. And then you have a whole lot of background work that you need to do in terms of trying to get that property squared away. So that's why the inventory is so important. And even just if you just have a file in your office at home or somewhere in your home, might be even just a plastic container, but start building the file and
keep it in your Tupperware.
Sorry?
Keep it in your Tupperware.
Well, it should be, because I'm always thinking of floods, right? So you don't want a flood to destroy all the work.
Very practical. I mean, one of the other things you were saying, a lot of this is there's the digital stuff too, right? Which was another point that you had said, your digital footprint, I guess your passwords for your computer and for your bank accounts and for all the kind of, yada, da, da, da. But you still kind of, like you're just saying right here, that even though you need the digital information, having the old school hard copy is still the only safe backup.
Seems to be the gold standard. I did go to a cybersecurity seminar and I was waiting for the holy grail of answers. And the expert said she has a notebook by her desk. And I was pretty crestfallen when I found out that it was back to old school, but that's what they do. And you need to tell somebody, though, if you have a password manager, you need to say to your trusted digital executor, this is my password. And it might be a phrase. Usually a phrase is pretty hard for a hacker to decode. So you come up with a phrase and then you've got to usually write it down and leave it on your desk so that your digital executor can find it if something happens to you. Or even if you have an online business, that's another reason why passwords need to be shared, right? Because we have all kinds of things now stored in our computers that are vital.
Well, and also I will go out. You told me one time about a client who I believe it was the wife passed away and she had all the photos on her phone and in her iCloud. And now the family wants to download those of all the kids and stuff, right?
Right. And I actually don't know if he got all the photos yet, but he was trying to hack in and he was doing all kinds of things. So there's also your cloud storage, which is where you back up everything. So you really do need to be almost systematic about the automatic renewals, like Calm, the meditation app. You might have that, it renews every year. You need to tell your digital executor that you have these things that are going to come home to roost. Your Amazon, maybe it's got your credit card permanently posted. That person needs to take care of it as well. So that's a huge, huge job for somebody to undertake.
And we throw social media under this too, your Facebook, your Instagram into there.
I've seen that with things, where someone has passed away and then their family is trying to close the account, or maybe they just want to let people know that the person's passed away or whatever it is. But then it just is kind of, living beyond the person and then they have no control over it.
The other one that you mentioned that I really want to do is this whole idea of the household. I think that's one people don't think, I didn't think oh, there's stuff in my household to do.
So the woman who taught the course that I took, the whole motivating factor for her to get into this was her husband passing away. And they had about a year to get everything organized. And they would do a walkthrough of the house. How often do we change the furnace filter? Who do we call? Is it Reliance? Who's the repair person? Because she realized that the husband had done a lot of that stuff around the house. So that was the kind of information that had to be downloaded. So she actually got all of that. But I think that's what struck her, is having that year of prep time, as it were, and trying to figure it out, making sure that she had all the information that she was going to need after the fact.
So Meredith, you mentioned that the Swedish death plan is one way to go about it, which I hadn't heard of, but I'm fascinated. Can you explain the Swedish death plan to us, please?
So I haven't engaged in it myself, although there was some mention at home about starting the process. So I guess we're going to be getting all Swedish tonight when I get home. It's all about being mindful and conscious of who you're leaving behind so that they're not left with an absolute disaster. And you might even be giving away things, like you're thinking about that, the hat you don't wear, but you want your granddaughter to have, or a scarf or a brooch. You're just being very conscious about not having more than you need and sort of downscaling. And it's a process. It's not something that you do immediately. So you might do it. It's the same as any decluttering process. It just happens to be called Swedish. And if you Google it, there's a big Swedish word that I won't even try to pronounce, but has to do with, I think it means death cleaning if you translate it. And it's another process. So it's something that you take on and you do a little bit at a time. Don't get overwhelmed. Just start to be looking around your house and thinking about, what do I need to do? If I'm not here, what would I have wanted to happen if I had passed away yesterday? What would I want in place for today? So if you use that as your kind of your mantra, it helps you think about, oh, well, maybe I don't need that extra pair of boots. I could give that away to Goodwill, or all those pieces of paper I've been hoarding since 1999. I probably don't need them. Things like that.
So it's a little Marie Kondo-ish, except Scandinavian, where you're kind of just making sure that there's not a mess around, and so getting kind of paring down, cleaning out, so that when it comes to the end, there's only the stuff that is needed, I guess, really.
So it's being mindful, it's conscious decluttering. It's all of that.
Conscious decluttering. I like that. That sounds like a Gwyneth Paltrow thing. Conscious decluttering.
So I just looked it up. In Swedish, the exercise is called, I'm going to butcher this name, dostanding, a combination of the word do, which means death, or do, which means death, and standing, which means cleaning. So you're right, it's death cleaning. And there's actually a woman who's written a book about it. And it's not depressing, because it's kind of like we said, it's like this Marie Kondo. It's like you might want to just do it anyway to declutter your space and move on. It's not fair to leave it to your relatives to deal with.
I mean, the Swedes, man, they got everything, right? IKEA, Volvo, H&M, and now this, right? They've literally shown us the way. Like they're leading everything.
Okay, so I'm going to say we're at number 4 on our list of 6 items. What else, Mare? What else do we need to focus on?
Okay, one thing is thinking about the actual burial and what you want to have happen with your body.
Yeah.
And that one can bring up a lot of really emotional types of things because of the way your family might, your cultural restrictions, all kinds of things. Like the person that I was talking to you about who hadn't told anybody yet, they had some religious restrictions, and the rest of the family was going to be saying, wow, like we've never done that before. And so that's why I said it's really important to tell your family. So that's burial, body disposal. Do you want to be embalmed? What do you want to wear?
You know what?
You're having an open casket.
Though, can I just say one thing? Like the open casket, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen to me, so I can't say, but like, honestly, like a lot of times, you just think about the people who, I don't know if you ever watched that series Dexter, like the people who do the makeup, right? For cadavers. Like these people are not good makeup artists. Like I don't want an open casket and some like weird makeup. Like that would be devastating. And I know that sounds so stupid and such minutia, and I'm so like egotistical, but I'm like, who's going to do my makeup if I'm having an open casket? Like that's something to think about. I'm sorry.
I am going to bring in a professional makeup artist. I'm going to tap Bobby Brown to come in and do your makeup for the occasion. She can put some of that Miracle Balm on and see if that helps.
The Miracle Balm from Jones Road Beauty. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so is there anything that's out of the ordinary in terms of, like, you're saying funeral arrangements? Is there anything that people wouldn't necessarily think about that we need to add into that bucket?
Well, yeah, who's coming? So we know sometimes people like to have very short guest lists with their funeral. Sometimes they're very selective. So if that's the case, you could be functioning with all of this out of a book. And we were talking about a book too, I think, when we were sort of originally meeting on this. And there are all kinds of excellent books. The one I use is called Before I Go. You can get it on the internet. And it goes through all these topics and it forces you to work through each of the topics. And then whoever is the person that you're trusting with all this information, they can execute it for you. So you might, I want to tell these 5 friends, and these 5 friends are going to tell 5 other friends if you have that many friends. And that's how you're going to get it organized, right? So I think doing that is probably a great way. So I don't think I've heard of anything really, really strange. I think some people might have an unusual instruction about what they want in the coffin with them if they're being buried in a coffin. Some people have environmental concerns.
So what are you hearing in terms of environment? If you're conscious of the environment, maybe cremation isn't the best way, am I understanding?
Right. It uses up a lot of emissions on the environmental stuff. So I think that's becoming a bit of a concern for people. Also, some people really just want to do a green burial. So they're just sort of going into the earth and they're letting happen what happens. And that's what they're most comfortable with because that's the most natural way to do it. Embalming fluid is incredibly bad for the environment. And it's something that everybody thought they should do because that's the way grandma always did it and our family's always done it. And now I think if you start to think about it, maybe it's not entirely necessary. And not every culture embalms anyway.
A green burial, which I'm guessing is still a burial. It's become so almost prohibitively expensive to buy a plot. Like I know my parents were organized and my mom has her plot that's right next to my dad's plot. And they've had them for a long time. Certainly, in their early 50s, they had their plots. But I live in New York and literally cemeteries here, it's $30,000 for a plot, like 30, which means you're now taking out a loan to buy a plot for your burial, which is insane. And that's only then for you. What about your spouse or what about your kids? So, and I didn't know until you just said that cremation was not that great for the environment. I would have thought it was the better option. It's certainly a cheaper option because burial has become so crazy expensive.
I think it depends on what you're prepared to spend money on. I think there are people who just think that it's a cost of being around and that they need to spend that much money. Some people pre-plan. So if you buy your funeral arrangements 50 years before you die, inflation hasn't hit, maybe you got a bargain if that's really important. I think other people don't place a lot of importance on it and they decide that they're simply going to be scattered. If they get cremated, they're scattered or they're put into vials. Some people, they have all kinds of creative things now where they can put you into a picture frame. Some of the ashes, I don't want to say you, but some of your ashes or your cremains, they can do that. They can make diamonds out of people, out of remains. And so some people like to have that because they like to have that closeness of their loved one. They might wear it as a necklace. So other people would be extremely uncomfortable. Some people bring an urn home, an urn of cremains. They put it on their mantle. Then they haven't saved any money. But what happens is if that person passes away who's in possession of the remains, then somebody else has to make a decision about what happens with those remaining remains.
So one of my favorite movies is The Big Lebowski, and there's this scene where the one guy has died and they've cremated him, and they're literally keeping it in a chock full of nuts coffee can, and then they go. There's a scene. It's like John Goodman and Jeff Bridges, and they go to scatter his ashes in the ocean, and of course the wind is blowing in their direction, so they put the ashes out. And it's all over their face. I'm hoping no one is going to scatter me like that. I'm already scattered. So, just kind of pay attention to the wind, at least before you do it.
To each his own. I guess the point is that everybody has their own choices and they just have to make those choices if you want them followed.
All of this just comes down to values, wishes, beliefs. And you have to figure out what's important for you and your family. Legacy is really, really important as well. So some people like to make a video or they do a series of letters or a series of videos for their loved ones if they have time. I mean, obviously, if death is an accident, you don't have time to think about, but you can be leaving things for children. You can be leaving things for friends or statements or whatever you want to do. So thinking about your memories. Some people create these elaborate videos and books of their story, and there are people who are in business doing that. Other people really don't care. So, if you're not worried about the legacy, or you want to just tell somebody, do it sort of like old school, you're just telling somebody the story and hope somebody else will share it, you can do that too. It depends, again, on your values and how much information you want preserved.
And what about, you said before, which I thought was interesting, family secrets, family recipes, things like that.
Right. So those butternut squares, you have to make sure that recipe is preserved. So putting together favorite recipes, favorite games, things that are part of the family tradition, that stuff is invaluable. I think being able to pass that down, and that's something that has been really important to your family. So I think the legacy, like a healthy touch of legacy, is probably a great idea.
That idea of like leaving all those kind of gems, like the thing that everyone comes to, oh, can you make this for this party? And you're the only one that knows how to do it. Like, my mom, who is Jamaican, who should know how to make it. She just called me and said, oh, I'm going to a Christmas party. How do you make your rum punch? And I'm not saying I'm the best rum punch person, but I'm the one that always makes rum punch. So my kids might want to know that. And it's beautiful. I think that seems like such a beautiful sentiment to have to leave these small little gems of yourself or hopefully, like, if, other people think they're gems as well, for everybody, so that they know, they can remember you every time they're doing this one small thing. It's quite beautiful.
Meredith, what is a death party? You mentioned death parties. Can you explain the concept of a death party?
Yeah, there's an app called My Goodbyes, and it's just been launched, and it's part of the whole Before I Go, and it's a really, really exciting development, because people who want to talk about this, you can see how, there's a lot of laughter about this topic, but it's serious, right? They get together and they talk about, these are my plans, and they can work through the app. I haven't done the app yet, but there's a lot of excitement around it because it allows people to focus and make those choices. And then it's all kind of like, you've got a plan. So if something happens to you tomorrow, that's the example I always use with clients, although I think it's kind of a scary immediacy for them. But if something happens tomorrow, you've got a plan. And that means that whoever you've left behind isn't going to be burdened with a whole lot of guesswork and I don't know what they would have wanted. And talk to people about what your plan is. If you have a favorite piece of music or a hymn or a favorite prayer, tell people. So by doing all this planning and doing all this talking about it at a thing like a death party, everyone around you kind of knows. And I think it's easier to have all the levity when you don't have a loved one who's going through something. Like, that's a very, very different situation. So I don't want to minimize that. But, while you're able to plan and you can do it, and sometimes if people have had a diagnosis, they're thinking about their plan as well, right? And that's totally fine. And you can be respectful about it and do it well.
It's what you were saying, Rebecca, that kind of stress, like alleviating that kind of stress, especially if someone passes away, quickly or unexpectedly, rather, the kind of idea of doing all the planning in the hospital hallway. Like,
yeah, they call it the hospital huddle. You want to avoid your family having to do a hospital huddle, which is, the doctors talk about that. They see people, the family, the person unfortunately has just suddenly passed away. And now the family is huddled in the hallway going, okay, now what, right? And there's a lot of planning that has to go in, and it has to happen relatively quickly, right? So trying to avoid some of that would help and alleviate.
I think the advanced care plan is important too. So that's usually part of your legal, but I think thinking about what kinds of circumstances you would want in place if you weren't well. And that's a really, really serious conversation to be having and to be thinking through. And when you actually start to go through that exercise, it makes you think, and it can get a little grim. So that's a good one to talk over with somebody. And people are at different ages and stages of their lives, so they're going to have different instructions. And that's a document that you're definitely going to want to review. So when you're healthy and well, your advanced care instructions are going to look a lot different from if you're in a completely different situation, you're not so well, or you've had a couple of health events. Now your instructions are going to be different. Do you want to be resuscitated or not? What would you want, people around you to know so that they can make decisions and be supported by the medical team?
And for me, it's really hit home. Like, I had a friend that had a stroke a year and a half ago, and he's been in, a nursing care for a year and a half. Like, but there was a large point of time when he couldn't talk or whatever it is. So you never really know when something is going to happen. So yeah, that is something that I think about. I certainly haven't been organized enough to write anything down, plan anything, or tell anybody. But, just watching my father go through end-stage Alzheimer's, watching other family members go through things where they're, have to have like 24-hour care and are now not kind of functional as full people. Really important to know, for somebody to know what your kind of plan is.
Well, I think also what your philosophy is. I mean, some people are life at all costs and some people are not. And I think as you go through various life events, your wishes change. So, while you're young and healthy, you might have a very cavalier approach to what's necessary. And then when you're not as well, or you've been through a few various struggles, you might think, you know what, it really wasn't all that bad. Let's not, we all think about that Seinfeld episode where they're going through all the scenarios and they're saying, broken ankle, stuffed nose, and Elaine screaming, pull the plug, yank it. I mean, we don't really want to be in that situation, but I think it's a good example of the kind of thinking you might go through. That's a document you're going to review a lot. And you can go on the internet and find, I think it's Advanced Care Planning Ontario, which is a really, really good website. And it has examples of different people with different situations and how you could customize it to understand how the decision looks different.
Meredith, let's go back to clients in general and just sort of all of us. Why is it that we avoid this planning?
Maybe there's a reason in our background why the whole concept of not being here makes us so squirrely that we can't make any decisions. I think there's also just, it is such a big job. Like if you want to have the quote unquote good death, it's a lot of work. Like we could all be doing it full time, planning for the good death, which seems a little counterproductive because we've got to plan for being here as well. There's also fear of offending people. Mm-hmm. So if I want to do something that's a little bit off book with my planning, like, I don't know, serve something unusual at my funeral as food, I might offend somebody who thinks that that's not a food that is appropriate. So then I kind of start to hold back from making plans. A big thing would be fear of making a mistake. So doing it wrong. And my view on that is you have to just overcome it.
You're not going to be there.
Well, it's not only that, but I think, when you're doing your constant review and having your death plan, it's about reviewing it. So some people say review on your birthday. I think there's enough to think about on your birthday that I don't want to be reviewing this. But pick another day, do your review, or maybe you decide that whatever you organized for the plan is no longer suitable. So just change the plan. Like while you're able to change the plan, you can change the plan. And hopefully you've got trusted people in place who will execute the plan the way you want it if you can't speak for yourself.
So one of the things, I think I'd mentioned it to you, Reg, about one of my husband's friends died a few months ago. And he left some money. It was in his will to have a party. And, he just wanted people to have a party, get together and celebrate. And even my husband, like for many years, 15, 20 years, he's been saying, oh, when I die, I want you to play this song. Or this song. So there's literally an Apple playlist called Funeral Playlist in our house, right? Just so that, there's the right music and everybody can have a celebration instead of just making it feel like a sad wake. But that, that's our thing. Like we already have, I don't have a funeral playlist. He has a funeral playlist. I don't know why, but maybe I should get one together because I don't want to have some weird music being played.
I think it's an act of love. Everything that you can do to help people plan, like when you think about the giant photo show that goes into a funeral and all this scrambling around that everybody has to do to get the photos together, like people are sitting there in the middle of the night cutting and pasting and sending and emailing.
Right.
Why not just do that now? Like you could even do that if you really want to make sure that you look good in those photos.
I just want to make sure I look good in the casket, okay?
I think we've established that Lana needs Miracle Balm and she's probably going to go au natural because she likes to skinny dip. So she's not going to be wearing any clothes in the casket either. And it's going to be fully open. So there's going to be a lineup for that, baby.
Where have we gone? The topic started out to be something so important and weighty, and where we've literally buried it.
Okay, that was great. As dark a topic as that could be, I loved it. She discussed the values, wishes, beliefs, and how important that is. I think for me, the takeaway, I love this idea of Swedish death cleaning because I love a good declutter and I like that organization. But I also think it's important to remember that even, we've got all this stuff in our lives and those things are going to move on. We're going to move them out. They leave our lives, and it's kind of an analogy for what's going to happen to us, right?
My big takeaway was about, the idea of being not just creative, but really setting down what you want for your funeral or party or whatever it is, whether that's a certain hymn, as she mentioned, or whether it's a playlist, of what's going to be played later at your party, or, the guest list, which to me is sounding more and more like a nightclub event,
exclusive party.
Like I got to make sure they got a red velvet rope, and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, so that was the takeaway that I really liked, to make sure that you have all that. So it's something that kind of reflects you.
That's it for this episode, and you can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. Also, all of the information, everything we talk about is in the links below, so check those out.
Don't forget to follow, like, share, and subscribe to Where We're At, wherever you get your podcasts.